Hello, and welcome to Andrew Broussard Watercolors. Today, we're going to do a fast and loose watercolor landscape painting based off of a photograph by Mr. Ian Campbell. Mr. Ian had shared this on a Facebook page for artists, photo references, and he's also a member of the Ron Ranson Facebook page, the Ron Ranson Disciples, and I'd asked him if we could share it there as kind of just a group challenge and just have fun with it. It's such a beautiful picture. So if you want to follow along, if you want to take part in the challenge, check out Ron Ranson Disciples on Facebook. Join us and you can find the image there. Okay, in front of me, I have a quarter sheet of Stonehenge Aqua. I coated it with water before I turned the camera on. It's 100% cotton and 140-pound cold press. Before this, I spent about 6 minutes looking at the photo, doing a Conte sketch, planning things out. It looks completely all over the place, but if you check out that video, you'll kind of see some of the thoughts and ideas that went through my head with this. So I'm gonna grab some raw sienna. I didn't put out any fresh pigment besides Payne's Gray. I was a little lacking in that area. That being said, I'll just use the brush to pull pigment up. I'm flattening out my paper. And I apologize if I sound a little bit froggy. For the past week now, it's kind of been a little bit of congestion. Everybody down here in Louisiana has been congested lately. I don't know if it's the wind, the pollen, or what. And right now you probably hear thunder rolling in the background every so often. Some ultramarine. Gently put this sky in. And put some light marks for where my water is going to be. A little bit stronger ultramarine up higher in the sky. My idea is that as it comes closer to us, it's going to be darker overhead, and the receding sky is going to recede and be lighter. You could even grab a little bit of light red oxide, throw that up in there. Though the way the photograph is shot, it is very reminiscent of the Wet and Wet used by Ron Ranson and the Wet and Wet shown by Stephen Cronin in YouTube videos. So you can really play around and have different approaches to that sky. Here I am mapping out the foliage here, and we have the background trees. Just kind of mapping them out, just using this mix as the color. We're going to come across, and we're going to have our growth on this side here. I'm going to mix ultramarine with a light red oxide for a purple. Use that for the stone path. It's going to come in, we're going to come to that bridge, then we come across. Grab my raw sienna. Use that to build up my trees. I don't know how far I want to go with the palette. I really haven't thought about that. In fact, I initially was thinking just monochromatic. But I do want different and interesting things up here for y'all to enjoy and to try. I'm not going to overlap the image of the original painting, photograph, because I think Mr. Ian would give me permission for that. However, I truly want to encourage you guys to check out the Facebook groups that I had mentioned, the Ron Ranson Disciples. The other one that he had shared it on, really not too sure of the name. It might just have been landscape photograph references for artists. And Mr. Ian had painted it and did an astounding job. I'm using this purple as my dark right now. This is just the ultramarine light red oxide mix. I'm looking for my darks. I think Payne's Gray is where I'm going to go next. I really enjoy Payne's Gray as my dark between water and land. I'm also using it up in this tree for that darkest portion. My main takeaway, when I truly kind of sat down and looked at the picture in the previous videos, kind of sketching it and playing it out, was that I would follow a Steelyard composition based off of tonality, meaning that near the center of the photograph or the center of the painting, I would have a big dark object, a center of interest. And to balance that in the Steelyard composition would be to have that tonally dark or same color and a smaller object far from it along the edge. So using that underpass here to balance out this dark mass and underpass. I think with compositions, if I am correct, I don't remember who it was for me to quote, unfortunately, or to misquote, but let's just say hypothetically, just throwing a number out there, that there's 14 basic compositions that you can pull from, like S-shaped composition, a tunnel composition, a L-shaped, etc. And you look for those compositions, you practice those compositions, with the goal being that eventually, as an artist, compositions are inherently taking place, like pleasing compositions. I'm going to mix the Payne's Gray with the raw sienna, going for some emulation of a green. I don't know if I mentioned Mr. Ian had already painted this photograph, and some other people have already followed suit with it, with the challenge. Mr. Ray, Miss Deborah, I think Joel, I'm going to follow it along. It's always exciting to see other people's approaches for the same composition. I was the one that posted the challenge, and I said bonus points for what did you learn during it. Some people had talked about shadows. just talk about color, etc. So I think group exploration like that is a great way to learn. So I'm playing around in the wet and wet stage. Hopefully the granulation is showing up that's taking place. Really enjoying it. So far the palette has been quite narrow. We've used raw sienna, ultramarine, Payne's gray, and light red oxide. Grab some ultramarine blue. Start varying this up. My favorite stage is the wet and wet stage. I feel like you could spend a whole bunch of time or just a little bit of time in it, but there's so much you can really explore. I personally had seen a lot of proportion lines taking place when I was planning it out. So I'm trying to keep those in mind. There's our reflection, just globbing Payne's gray in. It has a tendency to dry very light. Sometimes with globbing it in, though, everything else as it dries light, you then get these kind of splotchy Payne's gray marks. So experiment with that. And of course, there's a lot of different mixtures you can use for darks itself. I almost want to leave this area light so that it's not too much of a connection. We'll see what happens. I'm gonna try to pull up a little bit of lemon yellow, get a little bit more green. I think I could give or take lemon yellow where it could be in the palette, or I could leave it off, because sometimes I'll go for months without using it, then other times I'll explore it. I was playing around a lot with the gambage. I think I'll leave it out of this one. Let's see. I like the pond scummy green that we have up here. By the way, random fact, so my friend has a pond and he had it dug, so it's, you know, not a natural pond. And with ponds, it's a pretty delicate ecosystem. You have to pay attention to a lot of things and keep track of a lot of things in order to keep it nice and balanced. Anywho, I remember, well, the other day I was over there and he was saying how he had an algae bloom, but it had dissipated. And I said, oh, is that from these certain fish? Like from a different fish. But about a year ago, he had talked about a type of fish that he had to order, which he did, but he needed a license to have them, or kind of a permission to have them. And they were non-native fish that had to be sterilized so that they couldn't go out and go ruin the ecosystem. But they would eat the pond scum and the grass, which it's really cool that they're capable of doing those things. All right, so we played around quite a bit. I blabbed some, put in my two dark spots. We see the composition starting to take place. You can see where I didn't wet the paper that good. I have some scraping tools in my hand. The round edge of this card. See if I can pull out some whites back in here. I could use the sharper edge or this tool for some darker lines that'll backfill and give the ideas back here. I have been digging myself in a hole with some of these scrapes in previous paintings, where during the drying phase they backfilled and dried a lot darker than the softening area around it. So it's something that I had to address in the next stage. Just some horizontal scrapes just to give a little bit of that path. We have that handrail. Maybe I'll just use scrapes for those. I mentioned Stephen Cronin earlier in the video with the skies. He's also very good at scraping in trees and what have you in buildings. I'm going to wind up darkening this area up quite a bit anyway, so we'll come back to that. I have the number 1 rigger, which you can play around wet and wet with. This will soften and diffuse, but it adds a good little extra effect. And I'll toss that in just so we can see some of that. We do have a little bit of red in this area, but that might want to try to push forward, so I'll just have to be careful with that. And are we happy? Yeah, that's what we'll do. We'll pause the camera, we'll do a dry off, and then we'll come back for the next step. Is this out of focus? No, I think it's good. All right, so did the dry off. It softened quite a bit. I was looking through the camera. I was concerned it wasn't focused good, but it looks okay. Let's see if anything's causing that glare. All right, so I'm gonna grab the squirrel mop. I'm gonna use that to go into the 2 dark areas that I talked about, and kind of just use this to control some of my shapes. And as I wet and put in these spots, I'm going to keep in mind that they are now wet and wet areas. I'm going to go here, catch that edge underneath. And come up above. All right, so those are my 2 big areas of interest. And what I'm going to try to do, I don't like that line. Grab some ultramarine blue into that Payne's gray. Grab some raw sienna. Just trying to get a little bit of variety within that, just so it's not that pure dark. Is this light giving trouble? That should be good. bit of side brush dry effect. I always talk about that mark making, and I'm gonna bring it down a little bit, leave some of that underneath portion just for kind of like artistic approach. But I always mention Alan Owen, and Facebook says that today is Mr. Allen's birthday. He says 88 years old. Mr. Allen uploads like a YouTube painting a day and has that fantastic traditional painting approach. I don't even know if that's his right Facebook currently. It says he hasn't posted on there in a while. Am I happy with this? So I want to grab a little other color while I'm doing this. Lemon yellow. Yeah, let's do lemon yellow and the Payne's gray for the areas closer to us. All right. So I'm gonna grab my hake brush. It's kind of dry. I'll grab just a little smidge of water in the corner. I'm gonna grab some raw sienna. Speaking of age, this brush is it's definitely 4 years old at this point. And for quite a while now, I've talked about how I really need to start wearing other ones in, but there's so much art, so little time. In fact, speaking of which, if you enjoy this channel, please consider liking and subscribing. That really helps this channel out a lot. And if you can, and if you want to donate, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And I have the super thanks set up. There's a whole bunch of different things you can do to help this channel financially. And I try to take all that and turn around, put it back into more art supplies, and experiment with even more materials and approaches. So those of you that support, whether it's like, subscribe, or comment, thank you all so much. Those of you that are part of the Patreon, thank you so much. I really appreciate all your help. And of course, all y'all out there are welcome to follow along, and you are more than welcome to paint anything that I paint on this channel. And you have my express permission to sign your own name and to sell anything you do whenever you follow any one of my tutorials. I want you guys to be successful, to have fun, and to have some extra spending cash for art supplies. All right, mixing up some dark, put it back in here. Let's build this growth, these bushes on the bank. Little textural effects. Light red oxide. The rougher texture of a path. Let's grab some ultramarine blue in there. Probably a little too much ultramarine blue, but throw some Payne's gray over it. Let's scrape. So I have my different scraping tools. This is the sharp edge, but it's pulling back to white pretty nicely right there. Bring that down. Now that row on top, that's closer. All right, so did quite a bit of scraping. Let me pause and do a dry off. All right, so did my second dry off. Kind of see everything's kind of starting to pull together. I'm going back to the squirrel mop because I really want to fine tune some of these elements. I think, and it might be just a personal preference, stylistic approach, is that whenever I start looking at and start dealing with man-made construction, there's a desire for me to start tightening things up like this. I think a lot of times it's just a personal preference, personal approach, and what you personally enjoy. Also really trying to deepen that tonality. Now, originally had thought about not using the new gambage, but when I was doing the dry off, I was thinking how awesome it would look right here, and I feel like I was correct. I think it's just been what I've been kind of leaning towards, is just using this pigment, and I'm not really sure why. Maybe how it has that strong mustard stain look, but it's not that it's the mustard stain effect, it's the wanting to jump out at you. And maybe the color itself is just very warm, quote unquote, and I'm liking glazing with it because it just helps pull those areas that I like forward. So I'll just use that in the lower portion. Try to wash it off some. Grab a little bit of ultramarine blue. Pass that over. All right. Lemon yellow, and Payne's gray. building up this guy. I really don't want clean edges between those areas, so I'm trying to break them up some. Hey, Hammy. Lemon yellow. Look at that water with the pond scum effect. Catch a little bit of the edge of the greenery. And go back to the number 1. And play around right in here where we have this edge that faces out. Use that for my kind of brick color and say that side is facing us in the light, and then I could throw a little bit of ultramarine blue in and say that's the shadow side. The shadow side. Okay. For interest here. Let's do a pause. I want to do another dry off so I can see where everything's at. All right, so I think I'm going to stop this one here, but continue working on it in another video. Kind of like initial part 1 and then maybe a fine-tuning phase, and we'll see what happens in that. So I hope you enjoyed. Please like, subscribe, follow, and I will be back with part 2, and I'll go into more detail and really try to bring things out. It seems like everything's there. I just need to play around with it some. So hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you soon.